If everyone's enjoying this morning so far. For those who you unfortunately can't see everyone's faces, but I'm Elise Soon. I'm the Education Director with the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment. And we're very thrilled to be joined for all of you to join us. And we're very thrilled to have Dr. Donald Meichenbaum here with us today for a wonderful presentation covering a lot of topics. And he'll go into more of what he'll be covering today. But I wanted to just go over a few things before we get started. Really, we're the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention. We're a nonprofit organization. I know many of you know of us. Those who haven't gone to our trainings before, welcome. We're a nonprofit organization, and we really rely on donations, and we're very grateful for those who have donated to us so far for this presentation, because it allows us to continue giving these presentations. In fact, we plan to give one every month virtually right now in response to COVID-19, and so we can all stay safe. So, but now before we get started, I want to introduce Dr. Donald Meichenbaum to everyone. So Dr. Donald Meichenbaum is the Research Director of the Melissa Institute and a distinguished Professor Emeritus at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. He has served as Distinguished Visiting Professor at the School of Education at the University of Miami, and he is one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy. North American clinicians voted Dr. Meichenbaum one of the 10 most influential psychotherapists of the 20th century. He has presented in all 50 states and internationally. And Dr. Meichenbaum has published extensively, and his latest books are Treating Individuals with Addictive Disorders, a strength-based workbook for patients and clinicians, and The Evolution of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, a personal and professional journey with Dr. Don Meichenbaum.
Welcome to everyone. Thank you for your attendance and interest. And moreover, let me commend you on your good judgment in being here. This is as timely a topic for society and in particular for the mental health community. Let me provide a bit of a prologue to the material that I've provided you with. I want to highlight initially some of the challenges that come with the nature of the pandemic. And I'm going to tell you a bit about a story about the Melissa Institute and my involvement therein. We have also put together, given the role of violence that increases towards others as well as towards oneself as a byproduct of the pandemic, into a couple of different programs that we will look at. With my colleagues, who I'll introduce a bit later, we have put together a detailed anger management and bystander intervention program. Given the increased incidence, for example, of suicide and the depression in the aftermath of the COVID-19 virus, I have provided a detailed handout with regard to the treatment of individuals who are suicidal. And then finally, given the fact that we have well over 220,000 people in the United States who have died from COVID, I'm going to share with you the work that we've done with regard to treating individuals who have prolonged and complicated grief and traumatic bereavement. In many of these topics, I have done 5-day presentations. So I'm going to try and squeeze within now and 1 o'clock a lot of material. And I'm not a fan of PowerPoint. So I have put together rather detailed handouts that hopefully you will be able to use and find valuable. So let's begin with everything that we jointly know about the impact of the pandemic that we're all living through. Obviously, the increased risk of transmission that we are all dealing with and the accompanying loss of life in the United States is substantial. We're all living under the conditions of economic uncertainty, and in many instances, people are unemployed, and also their source of income, their business, have been violated. There is an increase in violence, family violence, domestic violence, due to shelter in place, as evident on the Melissa Institute documentation. We also have seen an increase in city violence, and moreover, the kind of issues that are confronting the police, whether you characterize it as police misconduct or also some kind of forms of self-defense. No matter how we increase it, we have developed a program of bystander intervention that I will review with you in some detail, and what we need to do to help diffuse, not defund, but diffuse the kind of police, individual, as well as other city violence that derives from confrontations. On top of all of this, we have the increased likelihood of natural disasters that people have lived through, whether it's the fires in California or Colorado, the various kinds of hurricanes and tornadoes that people are experiencing. Um, and moreover, we have just come through a polarizing election. And in particular, for those of you who are struggling with parenting stress due to homeschooling, this is accumulation. So even though I enumerate all of these kinds of stresses, the story I have to tell and share today is one of remarkable resilience and courage on the part of people. I have been involved, as I will share with you, a whole variety of traumatic events that people have encountered. These may be my work in terms of natural disasters in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and Sandy, whether it's my involvement in the aftermath of various kinds of violent episodes, being a consultant psychologist after 9/11, Columbine, Oklahoma City, my dealing with people who have been victimized. I've presented to the people who are working with torture victims, some 400,000 from around the world who are in the United States, parents who suicide. So in each of these instances, I have been heavily involved in some kind of trauma. The good news, even with my work with returning soldiers, is that no matter what traumatic event people experience, while most people are impacted, the data indicates that 75% of people will be impacted but go on to evidence resilience, or the ability to bounce back or deal with ongoing adversities. 25% of people who are so exposed to victimizing and trauma experiences, whether they've just occurred recently apropos of the pandemic, or whether they're the byproducts of long-term victimization in terms of adverse childhood experiences, other forms of victimization, get stuck. Evidence PTSD or complex PTSD, and a number of co-occurring disorders. So we are all living in a stressful environment. In fact, various surveys indicate that anywhere from 50 to 75% of the population, depending upon which group we sample, are at high risk for experiencing depression and anxiety, especially if they have vulnerabilities prior to the pandemic. So the question is, what distinguishes the 25% who seem to get stuck versus the 75% who are evidencing resilience, and in some instances even going on to evidence post-traumatic growth? And one of the tacks that I'm going to take in conveying that difference, and I've done this in a book called Roadmap to Resilience that you could all download for free, that I'll tell you about, is that everyone, including myself and each of you, are not only Homo sapiens, you are Homo narrans. That is, you are storytellers. And I'm going to propose and look at the treatment implications that the nature of the stories that we tell ourselves and that we tell others, and the accompanying coping responses that go with those storytellings, is what differentiates the 25% versus the 75%. So as I get into the content of what we're going to be discussing, I will highlight some of the nature of the stories that lead people to engage in suicidal behavior, the stories that lead to PTSD and to prolonged and complicated grief. In fact, I am a storyteller of sorts, and I will pepper this presentation with various, hopefully engaging and instructive stories that will highlight the points. So, in short, we have a lot of material to cover, and I hope that not only giving you this information, but talking about how and where you could apply this on a regular basis in your clinical practice, especially using telehealth and the like, will be a valuable tool. So let's begin the story of the Melissa Institute. Many of you are familiar with this. Melissa Institute was a derivative of a tragedy where a young woman, Melissa, age 22, on May 5th, 1995, was attending school, Washington University in St. Louis. And she was 2 weeks away from graduation at Washington University in St. Louis. And a tragic thing happened. She was carjacked and brutally murdered. That leads to the worst kind of phone call that parents could ever receive. But her parents then were able to evidence remarkable courage and try to honor her memory. And 2 years later, they created the Melissa Institute that's designed to reduce violence and honor her memory, reduce the likelihood that any other parents, no matter what the circumstances, will ever get the kind of call that they got. So in 1997, with the assistance of friends, relatives, and in particular with regard to their friend, Dr. Susan Keeley, who became the president of the Melissa Institute, I got invited to put together a scientific board of distinguished folks who have contributed over the years. Now, the Melissa Institute is not a direct hands-on institute in providing services, but apropos of this presentation, is designed to give science away. In fact, the Melissa Institute, and you'll see this on the handout that we have provided you with, have a website called www.melissainstitute, all one word, .org. And on that institute website, this has received over 2 million hits in the 23 years, that's remarkable, 23 years of service that have been provided. In fact, I encourage you as a supplement to this presentation to visit the Melissa Institute website, on which you will see, as you get to the face page, something called Resilience Resources. And in fact, if you click on that, that will take you to some other 40 plus papers by myself. And most importantly, on the side there, you will see that over the course of these 23 years, we have provided annual conferences, and all of the contributors of those conferences, their material is available to you for free. Everything that the Melissa Institute has provided, including this presentation, is for free. And as Elise noted, we are hopeful that you will find this of value and indeed make a donation, and in particular share this with your colleagues. You will also see, if you go to the face page, a second resource called COVID-19. And these are resources that cover a whole variety of topics on parenting, on suicide prevention, on various interviews with people on domestic violence, city violence, and the like. So the Melissa Institute, over the course of these 23 years, has provided an annual conference that some 8,000 people have attended to. So I have actually been very privileged and honored to serve as research director of the Institute. And moreover, I am now 80 years of age uh, and have been involved in clinical work for the last 23 years with the Melissa Institute. They have provided me with a unique opportunity to translate not only my clinical experience and research activity, but my personal grief into some kind of social action. Over the course of these years, I have worked with a whole variety of clinicians who are involved with a whole series of targets. Uh, Let me see if I can just uh, click on here one more time, sir. I lost me. Okay, sorry about that. I should tell you that as an 80-year-old, I have lost vision with one eye. So I am a little bit of a compromised uh, vision in terms of this internet Zoom work, but I've done a lot of it. So what I was saying is I have worked with a whole host of victimized group and want to just highlight for you that in your handout on page 6, I have enumerated a variety of activities where I turn my grief into social action. So in order for you to have some appreciation in the aftermath of the Newtown school shooting that Adam Lanza killed all those children and the like, the Melissa Institute did a survey of local folks in the Miami area who are NRA members to find out their views on the shootings and the aftermath and use of guns. Some 100,000 people per year in the United States die from gun violence. And that actually turned me into putting together a online description of how one could use motivational interviewing and have people address the issue of attitude towards gun safety, respecting the Second Amendment, but in fact, should there be any kind of restrictions on various kinds of gun activities. In the aftermath of the Parkland High School shooting and in response to the March for Our Lives, the Melissa Institute, with the help of my scientific colleagues on the board, put together a toolkit on school safety that has gone out to some 40,000 educators around the world that you could access. In the aftermath of the mass shooting in Thousand Island, California, my colleague, Antione Alderando, the executive director of the Melissa Institute, and I put together an article, rather interesting, and think about this, that 2 weeks prior to the mass shooting in Thousand Islands, mental health workers went and actually interviewed the perpetrator of that incident. And the question that we raised in our article that got actually published in the police chief's journal was how could you actually identify a potential mass shooter? Uh, what am I saying? I'm saying that in response to each of these kinds of tragedies, I am particularly impacted with regard to the nature of grief. And the way I personally cope with grief is to turn it into some social action. And the Melissa Institute has permitted me with this kind of issue. For example, with regard to the nature of the pandemic, Etione and I wrote an article that you could download on how to convince people to wear a mask. How do you get people to not only look at the reasons why they don't engage in that, but how to get them to generate self-generated reasons, how to get them to make commitment statements to others and to themselves, and how do you change the nature of the social culture. You'll see that these same kinds of principles apply in how do you get people to employ various anger management strategies. another byproduct of my involvement of turning grief into social action that you can all take advantage of is that I got approached by the Mayo Clinic and various other hospitals in order to see if I could be of assistance with regard to the ways in which they can cope with tragedies. I was significantly moved by the suicidal death of Lorna Breen. She's a physician from Manhattan who worked on the treatment of victims of the COVID virus. And this young, attractive, talented, bright person died by suicide. Well, in response to these requests, I had written a book called Roadmap to Resilience for returning soldiers and other trauma victims. I have now made that book available for free on the internet. In fact, you can go to roadmaptoresilience.wordpress.com, roadmaptoresilience.wordpress.com. So I put this available online for free, and I don't know if it's because it's free or not, but I'm very pleased to say that in the 5 months that it's been online, we've had 20,000 visitors from 114 countries. In fact, I have everything from Australia to Yemen. If any of you know mental health workers in countries with a Z like Zimbabwe, Zaire, Zambia, please contact them. I'd love to be able to say that I have all countries from A to Z, but be that as it may, if you go to that website, you can actually click on Appendix A, which enumerates all the different kinds of activities that put people in the 75% group. And you can download and share that as others have done with your colleagues, patients, family members, and the like. And this takes us right to our present concern, which has to do with the issue of anger management and bystander intervention. What drives folks like Melissa's parents, what drives folks like myself and the scientific board members, what drives people to these kinds of issues is that one of our presenters, Dr. Colleen Cicchetti, when she presented, she comes from Chicago, she brought to the attention, and I'd like to share this with you, a poem written by a 9-year-old youth who lives in Chicago. And permit me to just read his poem to you, because this sort of sets the tone of what the mission of the Melissa Institute is all about. I am so moved when I work in urban areas with people who are at high risk. So his poem goes like this, and in fact, we're going to put this poem on the Melissa Institute website so that you can share it with others. It's called Confined by Violence. He says, I want to go outside and play, but I can't. Not because it's a rainy day. It's to avoid the gunshots that may come my way. I want to go out and play, but I can't. Not because I have no bike to ride. It's because my mom fears I'll be another victim of a senseless homicide. I want to go outside and play, but I can't. Not because it's after hours or even that it's way too dark. It's because of all the gunshots that occur in my park. I want to go outside and play, but I can't. Not because I have no friends. It's because of all the violence that never ends. I want to go outside and play, but I can't. Not because I don't deserve it. I'm just trying to preserve life as I know it. I have 7 grandchildren, 4 children that you'll hear about. And I think about how they grew up in the sense of safety, of the absence of exposure. And we as a society should not tolerate, we should make every effort so that children do not grow up in that fashion. I'm reminded of the story that led us to engage in a whole set of presentations on silence, the violence of 2 young African-American girls, ages 9 and 10, playing with their dolls in the Miami area. And what are they playing? They're playing to prepare their dolls to attend a funeral. And during the course of playing that game, a drive-by shooting occurs and one of the children die. You know what drives the Melissa Institute? It's how to save those children. It's how to reduce the violence, no matter the form of who administers and who doesn't it. Now, what I want to do is, before I introduce the presentation, the program that we worked on anger management and bystander intervention, just note that I've included in your handout an article that I wrote on the nature of anger and, moreover, the application of work that we've done in the area of stress inoculation training. You'll see that I've included in your handout on page 6 a whole variety of additional articles that are related to today's topics that I would encourage you to take a look at. So it's important to know that people get angry when there's a distinction between the way things are and the way they would like them to be. Okay. And moreover, it's important to know that anger often occurs when people have a perceived social injustice. In fact, there's nothing wrong with being angry, okay? Without anger, there would be no social change, okay? There would be no gay rights, no civil liberties. There would be no Black Lives Matter movements. It's not that people get angry, but as we will see and incorporate into our slide presentation, it's what one does with anger. It's kind of interesting that Jim Averill and others who have studied the incidence of anger have found that in general, that about people experience something of the order of 7 anger episodes per week. That's about 25 per month. And that most of the anger that people experience is with significant others, mainly family members or people who are in close contact with them. What becomes really fascinating is that when you look at people who become not only angry but violent versus those who are low, who become bothered, frustrated, annoyed by and irritated by these kinds of social interactions, that the actual number of provocations by both high and low is comparable. So the name of the game isn't that we get angry, okay? Or as the author Douglas Fields indicates, that occasionally we snap, okay? And we'll look at what contributes to that snap. It's how do people cope with that anger? So in the presentation that we're going to offer, we're going to talk about what it is that takes anger to the point of becoming enraged, snapping, and becoming violence. How do we understand the ways in which our feelings, our thoughts actually can escalate the situation? How does the peer group and how their attitude towards violence make a difference? So I'm not only enumerating these, but I want you to appreciate that we're going to incorporate all of this research into the slideshow that I'm about to show you. A slideshow that we hope that you will go through yourself and that you will share with others. It's when the anger is too frequent, too intense, when it lasts too long, when people can't let it go, when people dwell on it, okay, that this becomes an important kind of consideration. So in order to further understand the nature of anger and the toll that it takes as I walk you through this. It's not only that people are angry, but they're hostile and they're depressed, and that these individuals can, in fact, take a toll. This leads to the entire research on type A personality and the hypertension, the cardiovascular, the high blood pressure. That is a sequelae. So, in a book by uh, Douglas Fields and others called Why Do We Snap? He highlights, as a neuroscientist, a little bit that we need to know about the nature of the brain. Interestingly, he even comments in the introduction that even Jesus snapped with the money changers, that the Pope reported snapped at times. He parenthetically notes that perhaps the only person he knows who doesn't snap is Mr. Fred Rogers. and that may also be an interesting statement about the degree to which people can evidence some kind of control. What Fields highlights is that if we look at the brain, especially the portion of the brain called the limbic system, the amygdala acts like a smoke detector. It results in people being sensitive to the various kinds of triggers that they're having. And that the amygdala or lower portion of the brain can actually hijack, can overrule, can usurp the organization and executive routines of the frontal lobe. So the name of the game, as you're going to see in the slideshow, is how can we help people put a brake on these responses so that the frontal lobes can throw water, not gasoline, on the kind of limbic system responsiveness. Moreover, the key question, and this is where we're going to go, is how can we bring the frontal lobe online? And here, with the help and information of a few colleagues, in particular, the work by Dr. Irv Staub, who developed a program for bystander interventions with regard to what he calls ethical policing, is courageous. He has highlighted that indeed, under certain circumstances, the person's emotionality, which is being challenged, may need a bit of assistance from significant others. This is what we call bystanders. That these bystanders can act as what we would call surrogate frontal lobes, that they could provide assistance and strategies to someone who's in a heated rage mode. And moreover, that these kinds of assistance that I'll walk you through can help people calm down, to stop what they're doing, to seek help, that they can share their responsibilities with other officers, that you can have a kind of top-down intervention. In fact, if you go to the Melissa Institute website and go to resource resilience, you can actually scroll down to Irv Staub and see his description of how to reduce the likelihood of police misconduct. And moreover, if you go to the COVID-19, you will be able to hear his interviews that Dr. Etienne has conducted with him on how to reach out to the roots of evil and violence and what one can do therein. Not only do we have the benefits of Dr. Staub, another member of the scientific board is Ron Slaby, who has major work on what he calls eyes on bullying. And he has developed various intervention programs, not only for schools, but with adults, with athletes, on how to use bystander interventions, of how to educate people about the role of the bullies and its influence of bystander intervention programs, how to develop some efficacy and skills in this, and how to engender empathy, how to tap into the kind of mirror neurons that are in the brain and the various neurotransmitters of the oxytocin and the vasopressin kinds of things that will lead people to actually have the courage to intervene and how to have the expectations and supports therein. In addition to Staub and Slaby, we also have the work of uh, Deb Pepler, who is a maven in the work on creating intervention programs for school children. In fact, the Melissa Institute has a separate website called Teach Safe Schools, which is all on bullying. Now, here's the really good news. Our colleagues, Lena Ogmary, has transformed the concept of SNAP, which we're all possibly able to encounter. So what you have in front of you is the picture of Etione. Then comes Catherine Shaw, who helped put together the pictorial representations. And now I'm introducing you to Lena. Lena has turned the word SNAP into an intervention program called Stop Now and Plan. Stop Now and Plan. So what we're going to do is have you have an opportunity to see how, with the wisdom of Staub and Slaby and Pepler, and the innovative program that Lena has developed over some 25 years in Toronto at the Childhood Center, where she has not only created a SNAP program for youth. In fact, you can go on to her name on the Melissa Institute as you scroll down and read about the benefits that accrue, not only behaviorally in terms of children evidencing self-regulatory behavior. In fact, she has included online there a movie of a youth who has in fact learned to use this kind of SNAP program to control themselves. But she's developed extensive training programs for parents and tailored it separately for boys versus girls or children on the autistic spectrum. So with all of this knowledge that we have about anger and snapping and so forth, permit me to walk you through, if I may, our program on anger management and bystander intervention. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that you will see is that this program, hang on, before that, before we walk you through the nature of anger, let me tell you a bit, maybe you gotta go back one at least. Okay, yeah. Oh, that's the one I need. Okay, so what we're going to do is have you appreciate the slideshow. In fact, the slides there are 104 of these. We don't expect people to go through all of these at one time. And as you'll see, there's not even a notion that giving people information will be appropriate. So the slides are divided into 4 sections. The first set of slides, 6 to 12, try to educate the person on their feelings about how they fuel their anger. How do their thoughts and feelings act as derivatives of that? The second section that we'll go through, slides 14 to 37, will review how we have applied the SNAP program in terms of fostering a kind of bystander intervention. Section 3, slides 39 to 88, will share with you the evidence-based cognitive behavioral interventions that people could use in the midst of heated exchanges in high provocative situations. And then finally, the last set of slides, 90 to 104, are going to highlight the ways in which people can engage in deliberate practice, mastery, make commitment statements. How do you get people not only to take what they've gone through, but apply it? Now, in fact, this program that I'm going to walk you through can be used in a variety of different ways. One is that we can actually have people go through the slideshow, either by themselves or with others. Now, as you go through the slideshow, one of the things we've done is to increase the likelihood that people will, in some sense, use what they're gaining. So we encourage people to actually print out the slides. And you will see that during our presentation, there are occasions for people to pause and reflect. And there are 6 times during the slideshow that we actually get people to challenge themselves. We know that giving people information is insufficient to change their behavior. That anyone going through these slideshow may be able to share the knowledge, but they will not do it. So therefore, there is a second way that this slideshow can be used, not only in terms of the kind of self-instructional procedures with themselves and with others, but that we would like to think about, apropos of what Dr. Ogmiera has done with her parenting program, that this can actually be a bystander intervention training program. And in the same way that Lena actually created videos with regard to youth using SNAP, we can well envision that for example, training of police or military or others who have to deal with provocative situations, that we could go into a variety of high-risk situations, whether it was the George Floyd or the Breonna Taylor or the many other instances, and actually use those as training material to see how and when individuals could actually use the SNAP program, Stop Now and Plan, in order to intervene. We also envision these programs being supplemental tours. There are many kinds of programs for road rage, anger management, domestic violence, batterers program, and we think that these slides could be a useful tool therein. So with all of this by way of introduction, let us now take a look. I'm not going to read to you all the things that you can read for yourself, but I want you to get a feel for what we have developed. So with Elise's assistance, I'm going to have her walk us through so that you can see the flavor of this. Keep in mind that this entire slideshow and this accompanying presentation will be available for free on the Melissa Institute website in a couple of weeks so that you can actually give this away. In fact, if you have anyone in your family or friends, children and the like who have problems with anger, we suggest that you consider giving this away as a Christmas stocking stuffer for them to employ. So I'm going to walk you through this, and then we're going to see how these can apply in the area of parenting. So we start off by asking people to understand how they can learn about anger, the ways in which they can pause and reflect as they go through this program, that they could print it, and that the goal here is not only to give information, but to challenge them on ways in which they could apply this in their day-to-day experience, especially when confronting provocative situations. So the first set of slides, 6 to 12, will give them a feel for the procedures. This is the 4 ways that we think that the program can be used. And at least if we just scroll through the next ones, this is the first section. We take you through what is anger. It's a feeling, it's a sadness and jealousy, that there's nothing wrong. And in order to get from anger to the violence, not only must you have the intense kinds of feelings, but what really facilitates that process is the notion of attribution of intentionality. You need to think that the person did it to you on purpose. And as we'll see, that kind of accompanying thought and belief is a key variable that moves us the escalation cycle from being irritated, annoyed, and the like to becoming enraged and snapping. As we continue on, okay, looking at the next set of slides, you'll be able to see it's key what one does with the anger, okay? And that there's nothing wrong with these kinds of feelings that one has. In the same way that anxiety is a forewarning or depression is a way to seek social support, anger is a way to take action. Now, the key is what form of action do people take when they're experiencing these kinds? What are the triggers? Carry on there, Lise. So these are the consequences of the anger and how it affects people. Carry on. And this is the way it can get you into trouble with the police and can violate the nature of the relationships that you're having with significant others. We're now going to move on to the issue of what it is as to whether an anger could be a friend or anger could be a foe. So we're indebted here to the talents of my colleague Kathleen Shaw, who I work with at a head injury center, um, in putting together sort of pictorial representations. So here's the first challenge for you. And if you're really going through this in some kind of thoughtful way by yourself and others, here's a moment to pause and reflect as to how anger got you into trouble. How has your anger hurt others? And is there any way that the anger that you've encountered has actually helped you in making informed decisions of how your frontal lobe can control the nature of the emotionality of the moment? We now move on to the second slide of shows. And this is a involvement of Dr. Ogman Mary's work on how to engage in a SNAP program, Stop Now and Plan, and how to be an active bystander intervention. So that when in fact you feel yourself or see your colleague, coworker, family members getting really worked up, what is it that you could say? What is it that you can do? What are all the kinds of coping skills that you need? So I'm going to walk you through these next set of slides so that you can start to see the evidence for the SNAP program and how people can actually access the research in this area of where it has been effective. And now what we can start to do is to see the description of what I've talked about, what Fields and others have talked about in terms of how the frontal lobe, the hypothalamus and the like can be used. So one of the nature of the steps that I'd like you to consider is if in fact you see someone who is getting all worked up, is there a way in which you can now signal them to slow things down? Okay, Elise. So here's what I'd like everyone who's listening me to do is to actually take your middle finger and your thumb and snap. Snap. So one of the things to do is how can you calm yourself down by going through a stop now and plan fashion. And not only that, as Irv Staub highlights, for many people, we have often used a code word to convey to others that they're getting worked up. So, in fact, when we've encountered individuals, police, or others getting involved, we not only do we snap, but interesting, one of the slides that you'll see included in this presentation is we asked someone if someone took a picture of what you are presently doing at this moment in time and put it on Facebook, would your behavior change? So for some people they've actually snapped and used the word Facebook, Facebook, Facebook as a reminder. Other people have actually used the word snap, 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 and actually warned others by going amygdala, amygdala, amygdala. One of the things you'll see included here and in my other work is how to talk back to the amygdala, how to get the frontal lobe to take charge. So let me walk you through with Elise's assistance on the kinds of slides. I'm not going to read them to you, but you could sort of see stop, now, and plan, the red, yellow, and green that's comparable to a kind of traffic light. So let's just roll through the next few, Elise, so that people can now start to see how SNAP improves executive functioning, both in children and adults. Carry on. This is a pictorial representation that hopefully gets the message across of what we were describing and the way in which the frontal lobe, the hypothalamus, and the others can actually have a downstream communication with individuals to exert some kind of control. Carry on. So you'll start to see as Lise puts us through these slides, and we invite you once again at your leisure to actually read through these and moreover to share them with significant others so that they could come to see how they could employ this on a day-to-day basis. Carry on. So you'll start to see how can we identify the triggers, the warning signs for ourselves, the kind of hard thoughts that we're having that escalate the situations. How can we calm our intense feelings? How can we take a breath, count to 10, back off, take a time out, seek help? You'll see that the next few slides sort of capture this entire intervention. Keep going so that we can move on to ways in which people can now engage in this. So one of the things that Dr. Staub has engaged in was, he called it ethical interventions can be courageous. We've changed this to be an active bystander in the moment, and that this too is courageous. In fact, there's a need to feel that other people would come to your support if you were all worked up. And the next few slides will give you a sense of the program we put together and how people can be detectives, know their expectations, consider options, and then, as we'll see, actually engage in after event activities or debriefings to see how, in fact, the intervention went well. So, Lise, if you just scroll through a few more, we'll give people a flavor of the kinds of activities that we would like people to pause and reflect on in terms of their expectations, in terms of the options, and more specifically, the ways in which they can intervene. So here is what you could say to someone: that this looks like a type of high-risk situation that we discussed. Do you see this situation the same way I do? Let's not permit it, and so forth. What are our options? So how can we get people to have the frontal lobes go online to exert these kinds of activities? Note that just having these in your repertoire is insufficient. We're going to have to talk about ways and how people can actually apply this on a day-to-day basis. And moreover, what are all the potential barriers or obstacles that will get in the way of people using the SNAP program? We have no appreciation that there's something magical about giving people information, especially in high provocative situations where they're going to use this. And we'll comment as we go along, and we'll roll through these now so that you can get a flavor of the interventions of how people can notice, catch, have empathy, assume some kind of personal responsibility, and actually see themselves as a peacekeeper, that they can actually try and change the culture of violence that exists in a particular setting or community and the like. So as we move from this SNAP program, the next phase of what we're going to engage in has to do with ways in which not only can we develop alternative ways to intervene, but also what can we do in the moment when we're at high risk situations. So if Lise scrolls all the way down to the next section, you'll be able to see these are what individuals can do in the moment. So when you're all worked up, and in a moment, I'm going to talk about parenting stress as a good example of this. So Lise, I'm going to let you just scroll through the next session so that people get a feel of what we've put together, of what I'm not getting, what am I getting that I do not want, what's my goals in the situation, if I was wildly successful, what that look like. So if in fact I want to help people to use the frontal lobe, I need them to identify the potential gas, and I need them to ask themselves, am I getting angry because I was interrupted, because my expectations were violated? You'll see more of these examples when I get to the parenting stress in a moment. So Lise, if you can just, Lise, can go down, you can start to see the nature of the triggers that we're going to try and educate people about. And what are the particular warning signs? I'll give you examples of this in a moment when I talk about some of our interventions with regard to the use of the clock and the like. In order to, these are the examples of the feelings that may fuel it. These are the kinds of thoughts that people may have, feeling that their anger is justified, that I'm entitled, that I engage in black and white thinking, and that I have a theory that this is unstoppable. It's not that just people have feelings, but they have theories about their feelings. Once I blow, it blows, okay? And what we want to do is to help people become appreciative of how they inadvertently, unwittingly, and perhaps even unknowingly escalate the nature of the violence, that situation that they're in. Oh, this is a good one. This is anger triggers. And the one that I want to highlight here is all the research that indicates that one of the things that elicits violence is that it violates your code of honor, your sense of manhood, the way in which you were insulted, the way in which they failed to follow your run, and that most importantly, that your reputation is online, that your peers will see it. So therefore, if you do not respond in an angry fashion, this will have negative consequences on your dominance and social esteem in that circle. Violence begets violence. These are various triggers that you can help people appreciate. Now, note that if you're going through a training program, you don't just roll through these. You actually pause and ask the folks, are any of these triggers applicable to their situation? Can they give examples of this? Has the anger ever gotten out of hand? Is there a way in which they can name and tame the anger, as noted in the next slide? Keep going. You'll start to see the slides of how they can understand the problems, how it gets out of control. And this is an example of how we try to help people to note the difference, to think of a situation in which they get really angry and frustrated, and what does it need to turn instances when they became furious and enraged to just feeling annoyed, irritated, and bothered. So how can they name and tame and even number these kinds of processes? Okay, in order to move on, I'm not going to show you a lot more of these slides. You can start to see as Elise goes through these, the way in which we have tried to build all of the research findings into this kind of slideshow so that people see particular provocations as problems to be solved rather than as occasions to automatically react. That there's a difference between reacting and responding. Okay, so when people are reacting, they can start to respond in an automatic fashion. So at least if you can just scroll on, people get a feel the way in which we have built into the slideshow. And here's an important distinction between people having a knee-jerk reaction, habitual, being on autopilot, and how they need to be responsive. Dan Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, where type 1 and type 2 thinking. The whole nature of this program is how do we get people to stop now and plan and mentalize of having type 2 thinking processes being brought in. Can they bring the frontal lobe online so that they're not throwing gasoline on it, but in fact, throwing water on that smoke detector of the amygdala? Okay, if we, Elise will just give you a quick feel for that which you could download and have others download in the future. So you can go right to the end, Elise. We've put together various ways in which you can manage the anger and have an anger control script that you could actually rehearse with significant others. We could well envision that court judges, for instance, could actually employ this whenever a policeman team is trying to seek permission, like in the instance of the no-knock entry thing. I could well envision a judge, even though that has been outlawed in terms of a Breonna Taylor kind of law of getting rid of no-knock entry things. But imagine if a judge actually asked policemen to indicate what was their goal in a given situation. How would they know if they're totally successful in accomplishing that? What are the alternative ways that they thought of accomplishing those goals, that there would be less violence, and what might get in the way of them using their SNAP procedures? And moreover, imagine that if judges in interacting with police who are seeking permission for various activities or in planning activities actually had to come up with a alternative non-violent intervention strategy using SNAP or some other variation therein to reduce it. And in fact, you could imagine if that written report were needed, you could actually have that written report conveyed to a grand jury. I mean, we could imagine judges who are dealing with people of domestic violence sitting down with an iPad and having to go through this and making commitments in order to avoid certain kinds of consequences. So the people at the Melissa Institute have created a whole variety. If you go all the way down to the contract piece, we know that just having people go through these various intervention procedures is insufficient, that we need to have them make a commitment to others. So if, Lise, you can go all the way down to slide 98, which highlights for us our appreciation that we need to have people make a public commitment of where and how they're going to use the SNAP Active Bystander Program, that they could actually make a commitment not only to themselves, but to others by having an actual physical contract that's available, and what it is that they got out of the program. Remember that in order to have people follow through, we need them to offer self-generated reasons about why this is all important. Now, one of the key elements in this anger control program is to help people become appreciative of their triggers. And what I'd like to do is to move on from this slide program to another area of the work that we've done. So Elise, if you could kindly jump all the way to the slide of the I See Hope of the parenting project as I introduce it. This is worthwhile noting that we will eagerly want to receive your response to this program and experiences therein. And in fact, we've put together, and on the front page is indeed my email address of dhmeich, dhmeich at AOL.com. So you can feel free to contact either the Melissa Institute or myself, or you'll also see the contact areas for Dr. Ogmiera, who can also respond to her program on SNAP. In fact, she will be giving a forthcoming presentation on the Melissa Institute on all of her work sometime in January that we invite you to attend. Okay, so I mentioned to you, I mentioned to you that I not only have 7 grandchildren, but I have four children. And one of the things we did was to study parenting. Apropos of Florence Goodenough back in the 1930s, she actually did a study. And what we did was we actually had people, as parents, keep track of all the times they get angry with their kids and what are the particular provocations. And now that parents are home with their children, with schooling at home and the like, what I want to do is share with you before we take a break about some of our work on parenting. Elise, if you could kindly put on the I See Hope video, clip, I'm going to tell them a story. So one of the things as a clinician I have encountered as a running parent groups is that the major reason that people refer children is because their children have been repeatedly non-compliant with parent requests, and that the child's behavior has violated the tolerance level of some parents. So let me begin by giving you an example that I often shared with my parents. So one of the things that we have found is that your children can be distressing to you for one of 8 reasons. And we have asked parents to keep track of all the things that get them upset with their kids. And we did cluster analysis of these events. And we found out that there are only 8 different things that your kids could do, or significant others. It doesn't only have to be kids. And then what we did was to try and summarize these using a mnemonic. Now, you could rearrange these in any ways that you feel appropriate, but we have created the mnemonic I-C-E, and then the word hope. We want to give parents the illusion that things are going to improve, so we came up with the mnemonic of I See Hope. So therefore, one of the things that get parents upset, or people in general upset about violence, is that they have an interruption of a plan. They have some notion of what it is that they have encountered. And in fact, this leads to frustration. It may lead to anger or guilt or other kinds of responses. Not only that, it's one of the implications for the child and for yourself and your relationship as a result of that. And some of the things that people do really concern their well-being in either engaging in high-risk situations or not wearing a mask or violating the rules that you've put on them, or the fact that they have to be quarantined for X period of time. And not only that, there's a notion that there's a kind of expectations uh, that are being violated. It's not only what they do, it's what they fail to do that upsets parents. And that this is not the first time that this has occurred. This is history repeats itself. And moreover, you, the parent, or you, the individual, are likely to over respond because of all the stress you have, the uncertainty, the lack of sleep, the use of substances like alcohol and the like that increase, that make your fuse shorter. And most importantly, we found that there were a number of things that parents have, that particular issues, perfectionistic standards, personal peeves, and moreover, this happens in public. Now, this is where you come into play. I'd like each of you to think of these 8 events being numbered from 1 to 8. And I'm going to suggest, as I share this quick anecdote with you, that in fact, the more of these that occur concurrently, and the likelihood of you thinking it being done on purpose is particularly problematic. So what I'm going to do is take a moment to share with you an anecdote I had with my own 4 kids. And then what I want you to do is to think of everything I tell you as consisting of one of these 8 items or the current occurrence. So I have asked my children on repeated occasions over the period of their development that I will put out the garbage cans at my house, and then I would like them to bring in the garbage cans at the end of the day. I do not find that to be an unreasonable request given all that I do for them. So on this one particular Tuesday afternoon, when I'm coming home from work, and I was pretty much stressed out that things did not go well at work in terms of my research, the computer, and the like, I drive up, and what do I see but the garbage cans? Well, not only the garbage cans there, but the bikes are all over the driveway. And moreover, my son's new baseball glove is on the front porch. And that, in fact, was the last time it was there that it was stolen. Well, given this array of triggers, stimuli, in terms of the garbage cans, the bikes, and the glove, I go into the house in my clinically sensitive fashion. And therefore, I want compliance. So what I do is I round up all the kids and I march them down to the curb. And I want you to envision this. In fact, you can see the neighbors looking out their windows, seeing me in action. So what I want to do is, and I want you to imagine this, is have my 4 children and I encircle the 3 garbage cans and hold our hands around like a seance, waiting for thoughts to emerge. I thought this might be an interesting way to get compliance and get the message across. At which point my son David, a kind of interesting character, says, "Can I say something?" And I say, not now, Dave, we're waiting for thoughts to emerge. And he says, no, Dad, this is very, very important. And I say, it better be. And he looks up at me, as the other 3 children do as well, and say, "I don't know how to tell you this, Dad, but you see these 3 garbage cans? They're not ours. These are Billy's from across the street. We just left them here to see how you would react." Now, the key question before me, and as well as all the people who have to deal with anger, is how do I view he's telling me they're not my garbage cans? So I mean, whose idea was this anyway? Huh? I mean, is this the first time you guys have been doing this to me? Wait, was Mom part of this kind of event? So do I see this as a personal threat or provocation? Look, do you have any idea what would happen if I ever did that to my father? Huh? No, where did he come from? He's been dead over 15 years. He is what we call an availability heuristic in my back pocket that I could call up at any given time. So Don, when I, your father, die, I want you to be able to tell stories about me to your children. And most importantly, I want you to tell bad stories. So by contrast, you look, so in an emotionally charged way, not only do I respond to the current stimuli, but I recur to the past history of all the times. Or do I view this as a ingenious effort on the part of the kids to give me pause? Our lives, especially during the pandemic, are indeed confronted by garbage cans. And the question is not that the event occurs, not that the trigger is there, but what do we do with all that anger and emotionality? Does this turn me into an episode of snapping, or do I give me occasion to pause and reflect? Now, go to the I see hope. Any kind of experience you have, let's go back to this. I was overloaded because of the stress I've had. Okay. My plan was interrupted in terms of the first item. This is not the first time the kids have done it, so this is history repeats itself. It's violating my expectations of how they should be embedded. It occurs in the presence of all those neighbors, a kind of investment. It violates my sense of the perfectionistic that when I tell them something, I am entitled to get a response. And then I can even reflect on the implications this has on my relationships. And did they do this on purpose? So if you analyze for a moment my anecdote, I'm a 6 overload, 1 interruption, 5 history repeats itself, 4 expectations, occurred in public embarrassment. It's my personal peeve in terms of my perfectionistic standard. So I am a 6154871. Okay. The next time you get upset with kids, the next time the police get upset with people who are calling them, who are non-compliant, who are challenging their manhood, the next time people don't want to feel that their code of honor, their personal peeve, that they want to look poorly in front of others, there is no instance that I would describe to you that does not fill I see hope. What have I tried to cover thus far? I tried to tell you the story of how the Melissa Institute is committed to try to reduce violence and how it grew out of a tragedy. I tried to share with you the way in which I personally have tried to translate my grief into social action, all of which is on the Melissa Institute in terms of the interviews on gun control or safety, the way in which we could try to make the Roadmap to Resilience book available to folks for free. I've tried to have you appreciate and go through the slideshow. I know I went through that very quickly, but we are making that available to you. We invite you and others to go through it, give us feedback. It's still a development tool. I've tried to have you appreciate that this contribution is one of derivative of the efforts by other folks, Doctors Staub, Slaby, Auger, Pepler, and others. And finally, I want us to think about what is it that triggers us? Can we name and tame our anger, our emotions? And moreover, the next time you get angry, see if you can take out an I see hope. In fact, when my children were growing up, I taught my wife the I see hope metaphor. And we had nailed it in such a way that we can now say that I think this is a 1, 2, 7, 8. That may sound like tongue in cheek, but all of our lives are filled with garbage cans. It's not that we get angry. Anger is a human emotion. It's a difference between the way things are and the way you would like it to be. is a reflection of a social injustice. It's how do we take anger and not let it escalate to violence. In the subsequent sessions, I'm going to talk about some of our work on stress inoculation training. I'm going to talk about how these same principles can be applied in work with people who are suicidal, and mostly people who are dealing with prolonged and complicated grief and traumatic bereavement, given what we as a country are going through. So at this point, let me pause and see if any particular questions or answers, any particular questions or responses or reactions have been forthcoming. And then we'll take a 10-minute break, at which point we'll be able to come back and deal with the rest of the presentation. Once again, I thank you for your interest and attention. Okay, Elise, did anyone have any immediate responses or questions therein that we can address?
Yes, we got a few. One of the let me know if you can hear me. One of the first questions we got was, how do you envision people? I know you explained somewhat, but how do you envision people using these slides? How can the attendees use these slides? What do you recommend?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the use of these slides, like Irv Staub has indicated, has to come from top down, right? So one of the things that he highlights in his bystander intervention program is that how you need to have people who are in charge of organizations buy into this so that the culture actually changes. For the clinician, I don't think that you need to have people go through all 104 slides, but if in fact you have a particular issue to help people appreciate how their anger escalates to the point of becoming violence, you can look at that first set of slides on what fuels it in terms of the thoughts and feelings and use that as a supplemental tool so that the way in which the program is put together is to do with regard to the 4 sections. So if you had them understand the nature of anger and what is its impact and have them describe examples therein, then you can say, what do we know about what people do in the heat of the moment? And then you can go on to section 3, okay? And moreover, you can have them look at the variety of intervention tools, pausing along the way. Remember that we have included various challenge episodes. In fact, you'll see that we've included having people perform personal experiments of imagining a scene where they've lost control, like my garbage cans story, and what would they need to do to change in terms of their thoughts, feelings, behaviors, reactions of others, so that now they're only annoyed and irritated as compared to becoming furious and enraged. The notion is to have them better understand the way in which emotionality is trying to steal and overcome the top. So that would be one example. Many people also run treatment programs that are already anger management that are based on cognitive behavioral principles of battering intervention programs or road rage or people dealing in the courts with domestic violence. We think that this slideshow could be an effective additional tool, supplemental tool for those kinds of programs. And then apropos of the work of Dr. Ongmieri, as you read it, she's been remarkably effective. Not only has it changed behavior, but she has actually demonstrated and collected data that having children engage in this stop now and plan actually changes the brain, the structure and function of the brain. That there are neurophysiological sequelae as measured by fMRIs as a byproduct of these efforts. She's also tailored this and has programs throughout Canada and now throughout the States. And I would definitely have folks look at those parent training programs. It could also be used in schools, in workplaces, and in management. Here's my fantasy. My fantasy is that all folks who have been involved or are involved with provocative situations like police, military, and the like. In fact, you can go on to the Melissa Institute website and the papers I've written there on stress inoculation training to see how programs like the SNAP have been employed by the Israeli Defense Forces and other organizations. So one of the ways to cope with the tragedies that we are seeing that accompany the pandemic would be to use this as a supplemental tool. We are more than eager to hear from clinicians on when and how they can use it and other kind of creative options on this program. Hopefully that gets at some of the comments. Were there other questions, Elise, that were forthcoming?
Yeah, we have a few. And there's, I guess the next one I'll go over is that what do you see as the potential obstacles or barriers to the implementation of your bystander intervention program by various groups, especially the police?
Well, as I was mentioning, I think that there's a real need to try to impact the culture of immediate reaction in violence. There may be some obstacles on thinking that if I intervene, it's too high risk a situation, and that I need to respond immediately. I'm being shot at, I'm being challenged in some ways. And this program is not designed to undermine the kind of police or other kinds of reactivity that's warranted by the situation. But if you can get people as an organization or as a group thinking that Snap, Facebook, amygdala, or what have you, might be ways to call online the frontal lobe. I think that the degree to which you are really working to keep your fellow co-workers, your fellow policemen safe. You don't want them to get into trouble. You don't want them to lose their job. You don't want them or others to be in any way victimized or victims of violence. So the key question is, how do we get as a priority, given that we wanted to accomplish a specific goal, what are all the alternatives? And is there a way to have a facilitated communication process? You're not going to do this unless you have some kind of bystander intervention training program beforehand. You have to have people agree that they're going to be responsive. You need to have people agree that if you see me falling into an occasion when I might snap, how can you just snap back to help me avoid it? So we're not naive to think that this is a quick fix, but imagine if all of those police, for all the military and the like, actually had to go through this training program, and that we actually had videotapes of all the police incidents and played them, okay, and then asked the group what would have been an alternative nonviolent way to accomplish the goal. What is the goal of getting someone who's selling cigarettes incorrectly, of having a possible forged check, of being a potential individual? So therefore, all of those would be things that need to be addressed. Let's take one more and then we'll take our 10-minute break, Elise.
Okay. We got a couple of questions kind of related to the elections, and this is one that stood out. How do we help people who are reacting angrily with the show of guns and threatening of violence to our current election drama, which is interrelated with COVID restrictions?
They should ask that question of whoever's the next president, not me. That's a tough question. We went on and wrote an article that's online on how to get people to wear a mask. Okay, the key question is how to get past the point of where every political argument is a garbage can that escalates. So the key kind of thing is, how do you show empathy? How do you convey a perspective taking of the other point of view? If in my work on motivational interviewing, one of the things we need to know is you need to avoid argumentation. If you just argue back, then you're going to create a hardening of people's categories. It's going to lead to what's called psychological reactants. So you got to find out what's their goal in the situation when they show up, when they're confrontation, how would they like things to be? Okay. What's their goal? If they were wildly successful, okay, what would that look like? And moreover, is there a way that they might think about ways to achieve this in a non-violent fashion? Is there a way that we could agree on some kind of joint perspective taking? You don't get people to change unless you can get them to come up with self-generated reasons why they should behave it. There's nothing that you are going to be able to say or do that's going to change people's beliefs if you can't walk in their shoes and have them walk in your shoes. So everything we know, and if you go back to my article on how to talk to people about guns, you could start to see the degree to which there's any area of compromise. Avoid argumentation, develop a discrepancy, express empathy, be supportive, and nurture self-efficacy. Those are the general principles that lead to behavior change. And I hope the next president uses them, whoever he may be, in answering questions like this and bringing the country together. Well, welcome back. Hopefully you've all had a useful and effective break therein. Let me give you an overview of the remaining portion of this presentation. I mentioned at the outset that each of us are not only Homo sapiens, but we are Homo narrans, we're storytellers. And as you could tell, given my trying to use a teaching story of the garbage cans, I am a big storyteller. So I have yet another story to share with you. And then what I'm going to do is talk to you about some of the work on the stress inoculation training that we've done that supplements the slide program. I'm going to share with you a particular intervention that we found useful called a clock analysis. And then what we're going to do is move on to looking at the 2 treatment manuals that I have put together. Before doing so, I'm going to share with you some of the controversies in the field of psychotherapy that should make us more humble about the effectiveness of what it is that I have to offer. And then we will move on to a consideration of the treatment manuals for suicide and grief. Once again, I often have more material than time permits. In fact, I'm scheduled tomorrow to do a 6-hour presentation just on the suicide piece with videos and the like. So here's the story that I want to share with you. In putting together the slideshow that we went through, I indicated to you that I was indebted to the work of Staub and Slaby and Pepler and Augimeri and my colleagues, Etione and Catherine Shaw, who helped me put together that slide that we invite you to. I failed to mention the person who has been most influential in all of my work on cognitive behavioral intervention and the like, and that it turns out to be my Jewish mother, Florence. So let me tell you a little bit about how I became nominated as one of the top 10 psychotherapists of the 20th century. So when my father died, my mother went back to work. And I was at in the high school and into City College in New York at the time. Now, when my mother went to work, she would come home each day, and I and my 2 sisters would be eating dinner with her. And she would come home and not only help prepare the food, but she would always come home with stories. Now, my mother had a very interesting way of telling stories, because not only would she tell what actually occurred in her work, And Sadie asked her to move some boxes. She hurt her back and what's she going to do? So my mother would not only tell the story of what it is that she encountered at work, but she had a very unique way of telling a story because she would also incorporate in her storytelling the nature of the feelings and thoughts that she had. And moreover, this is where the key came in, she would then edit and say which were good thoughts and which were bad thoughts and how the feelings affect her and so forth. Now, I realized that I ate dinner with this woman my entire formative life. And that, in fact, what I had done for my entire professional career is to validate my socialization process. So when I went to the University of Illinois to get my Ph.D., what did I do my study on? Okay. I taught schizophrenics how to talk to themselves. They're doing it anyway, so I thought it would be a good idea to, in fact, teach them to do that. And then I went to the University of Waterloo in Ontario. And what did I do in Ontario? I taught all kinds of populations to do what my mother does on a regular basis, whether these are teaching hyperactive and impulsive children to think before they act, and in fact became the forerunner of the SNAP program that has been used of Stop Now and Plan. I've worked with people who are angry in terms of learning how to notice, catch, interrupt, the kind of ways in which they inadvertently, unwittingly, and the like behave that leads to other reactions like that. I've worked with people who are storytellers with regard to victimization. So clearly, yet another influence on me. And what you'll see is the goal of my mother was for me to take her voice with me. And in fact, my goal in working with patients, as we're going to see, is to have them take my voice with them. Okay? I want to put myself out of business and let them become their own therapist. In fact, one of my most favorite questions to ask clients, and I invite you to try it with your clients, is the following. I say, I'd like to ask you something a bit different, a bit unusual. Do you ever find yourself out there in your day-to-day experience asking yourself the questions that we ask each other right here? That's a really clever question. Do you ever find yourself out there in your day-to-day experience asking yourself the questions that we go over right here? Do you ever find yourself out there in a provocative situation, about to lose your cool, about to become enraged, that you take what you've gotten from the slideshow and in fact use it? In fact, as you go through the slideshow, you'll see that we included a variety of questions that we would like people to ask themselves. How to generate a sense of curiosity and ownership, a sense of responsibility, of getting them to articulate beforehand what's their goal in the situation. How can they turn provocations into problems to be solved? So one of the key techniques that we have found useful is what we call a clock analysis. So Elise, if you could put that up, I'll walk people through some of the work that we've done. So here's an interesting question for each of you who are in the mental health field. I ask myself this question all the time. What is it that I bring to the clinical enterprise that makes me more helpful than all the other people in people's lives who they could turn to? What is it all of my training, my orientation, and the like bring to bear that their local Mother Earth figure, okay, their support, social supports, their bartender, their beautician, their fellow colleagues, their chat lines, what is it that I do that makes it worth paying me for the hour or whatever period of time? So my answer to the question is the following. That is, not only do I listen to the client in an empathic, non-judgmental, trust-engendering, compassionate way. In fact, when my wife hears me say that, she says, why don't I ever do that with her? And I say, well, if you paid me over $100 per hour, I do that with you on a regular basis, okay? So the key question is, what is it that I bring? And I bring not only the ability to listen in an empathic, compassionate fashion and solicit from the client their goals of how they want things to be, okay? But I have a way of telling the story back. And I want to share that storytelling back procedure with you and invite you to try it with not only your clients, but with significant others in your life. So I say to the client, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, see if I picked up on, see if I'm in tune with. I use a lot of Socratic questioning. And the questions I use are mainly how and what questions, not why questions. So as I understand it, I say to the client, and I put my hand at an imaginary 12 o'clock. And what 12 o'clock are the nature of triggers of what happened. Okay. And these triggers may be external, so what someone did or said, or what someone didn't say or didn't say that you found as a potential provocation. Okay. These are the I see hope kinds of events in your lives. Okay. Or the 12 o'clock might be an internal kind of trigger. It may be a sense of apprehension. It may be a violation of your code of honor. It might be a flashback. It may be a night. It might be an urge to use substances, as I describe in the book on treating people with addictive disorders. So not only do I put that back in the lap of the client, I ask them for examples and embellishments of if indeed I'm correct that got going. And then I slowly move. And in my instances, I usually move to number 3 o'clock, which I describe as the kinds of feelings it had. And there are two kinds of feelings that people could have at that point in time. These are primary emotions. So I felt really sad, anxious. I felt maligned. Or it may be a secondary emotion. I felt angry, pissed off, okay? Marginalized, okay? I felt anxious that I think the depression may get out of hand. So what happens is 3 o'clock are a variety of emotions that people might experience. And it's very interesting from a therapeutic point of view to view those emotions as a commodity that someone does something with. So I could say, Don, when that happened with the comment, how did that make you feel? And moreover, Don, what, if anything, did you do with those feelings? So it's very interesting to take 3 o'clock and view it as a commodity that people can do something with. To which the client might say, I don't know. To which I would suggest that you, the therapist, say, I don't know either. Okay? So you don't need to be a surrogate frontal lobe and show people how smart you are. Okay? You want to nurture a sense of curiosity in the client. Now, one of the things about asking a question like, what did you do with all those feelings, is that there's a supposition behind every question that, in fact, there's something that people do. And one of the things we will do in therapy is to ask people what they do with that commodity of emotions. And then I slowly move my hand down to 6 o'clock. And once 6 o'clock, it's the nature of the automatic thoughts, the images that people have, the kinds of beliefs that they've done this on purpose. Okay? That I am justified in my response. The attribution of intentionality, remember, is what you need to do to see people doing it on purpose to get from the point of anger to the point of escalation. It may be developmental schemas that I'm a burden on others, that there's nothing that will help me, that may be a kind of paralysis of will. And if you go to the various papers that I have online, you'll see more of the details of the cognitive and affective processes that keep people in that 25% group. And then I slowly move my hand to 9 o'clock. And once 9 o'clock, it's the behaviors and the resultant consequences. How do people react? So what is it that people do? Sorry about that. Okay. What? Let me get that off. Okay. Sorry about the interruption of the phone. I do not see that as a provocation. Okay. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm saying you are an exquisite listener to the language that people use in telling their stories. Okay. And that any story you are ever confronted with by a client or significant others in your life or whatever, can be broken down into these 4 quadrants, of 12 o'clock being the external or internal trigger, 3 o'clock being the primary or secondary emotions, 6 o'clock being the automatic thoughts, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and the like, 9 o'clock being the nature of the behaviors and the resultant consequences. Now, here's the part that is critical, because I then say to the client, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, see if I picked up on, and I put my hand at this imaginary 9 o'clock and move it around this imaginary circle. And note that I go around very slowly and I do not finish the sentence. And I'm telling you that if you try this with your client, there is a remarkably high probability that the client will finish the sentence and say circle or cycle. It's just a vicious, and they'll say cycle or circle. Now, if you do this whole thing and you get to 6 o'clock and they have not said it, you say it, okay? This is not charades. Sounds like, small word, 2 syllables, okay? Come on, fella, vicious, okay? This is psychotherapy, to which they're likely to say cycle or circle. And you, in your best therapeutic may, put it back in their lap and go, vicious cycle? In what way is this a vicious cycle? Are you telling me, are you saying to yourself that when this occurs 12 o'clock, you do what? 9 o'clock? And that makes you feel how? 3 o'clock in terms of the emotion? And you have the thought of, and you become even more hypervigilant? Any story you hear from anyone in your life or read about in a book or play or movie can be broken down into these 4 quadrants. And then I say to the client, look, let's not change anything. Let's see if this vicious cycle, as you describe it, actually occurs. So what we then do is get the client to actually collect data, and they're going to come back and say, I do it. And you say, you do what? And they say, I do the vicious cycle. You do the vicious cycle. Tell me about, tell yourself, tell the group about it. Tell your family about, and if you do the vicious cycle as you describe it, what is the impact? What is the toll? What is the price you and others pay? And is that the way you want it to be? What was your goal in the situation? And if you do the vicious cycle as you describe it, how does that get in the way of our achieving our goals? Not only that, you can then ask the client as they describe this vicious cycle of how they inadvertently, unwittingly, and unknowingly are inadvertently contributing to the very behaviors that they're complaining about. You can then ask the client, what could we, therapeutic alliance, do to help you achieve that? What are you now doing? So one of the things that becomes interesting is we can now look upon the client's present behavior, whether it's using substances or acting out, becoming enraged, stuffing the feelings. That's their way to break the vicious cycle. It's not that they're crazy or sick. They're just stuck using something that's worked. They're reacting instead of responding. Unfortunately, they're in the presence of a therapist or someone who's doing bystander intervention that can teach them better ways. So when we're doing the bystander intervention training program, we have found that using the particular clock analysis is important. 2 other quick observations about this clock analysis and how you could use it. Look, if you don't want to try this with your patients, try this with your significant others, okay? So you could say, when you take that tone of voice in front of other people, you know how it made me feel? And look, I knew how to drive the car before we were married, and there is no event in your life that you cannot break down into this clock metaphor. There is no one in the program that you can't use this to help people understand the triggers that get them going. Now, I actually supervise a number of people who run groups, and it turns out they don't run groups, okay? And in the training. They end up doing one-on-one with the rest of the group listening. Now, if you're willing to play the game of the clock, and in fact, we even post this slide on the wall, and we teach people how to use the clock in different ways to put them in a consultative mode. So you can now play the game of saying, look, to one member, so what got you going was, and the trigger for was you, and what set you off was, so now you could do 12 o'clock across the whole group. And when that occurred, what was common among those? And how did it make you guys feel? Do others of you have those kinds of feelings? And what do you do with all those feelings when they occur? And if you do that, what's the impact? What's the toll? What's the price you and others pay? And then you had the thought of, do others of you have those thoughts? And it even made you more vigilant about? It cut down, are you telling me that you're able to talk back to the amygdala? And how did people respond? So what makes me different from the bartender, the beautician, the Mother Earth figure, is that I can help people become aware of how the ways in which they appraise events, the accompanying feelings and thoughts, and their behaviors. I think we can use these kinds of interventions in an effective way. Oh, two other kinds of notes is that when people come in and say it worked, okay, I usually say to the client, what did you do that worked? What does that mean? Are you telling me that you did what at 9 o'clock? And when you did that, that made you feel how? And that you were able to share it with others? And that you can now take credit for the changes that you brought about? And that even makes you more convinced that you could try this in other situations? So we could also use the clock as a virtuous cycle. Because as we'll see, it's not enough for people to change after they've gone through the bystander intervention program. There is a need for people to take ownership, to take credit for the changes of what they did that made a difference. Oh, one other kind of cautionary note. I often see adolescents in therapy. And one of the things interesting is they never use a clock. I mean, if you ask an adolescent what time it is, they immediately go to their cell phone. So in my office, there is a clock with a 12, a 3, a 6, and a 9. If you go to the next slide, please, this is on page 23 of your handout, okay? You will see that I've taken everything that I've just described. Okay, we'll get to that. On page 23 of your handout is indeed an example of everything I've described. We'll get to this feedback informed in a moment. Let me instead move to a kind of cautionary note concerning the treatment manuals that I'm about to present. I've included in your handout something called the controversies in the field of psychotherapy. And these are the kinds of issues that need to be addressed and a kind of cautionary note. In the handouts, I included a list of additional articles that you could look at. And one of the additional articles that's online is called How to Spot Hype, H-Y-P-E, in the field of psychotherapy. And in fact, this article that was co-authored by Scott Lillefeld, and unfortunately, Scott has recently died, and he was a brilliant psychologist who I had the honor of collaborating with on this article. We put together a consumer's checklist on how you could be a critical consumer in the field of psychotherapy. Because as you will see, the field of psychotherapy is filled with BS. Or as Rachel Maddow will point out, it's filled with horse hockey. Really, she uses that phrase. Google it, horse hockey, okay? And what this means is that the field is filled with exaggerated claims. It's filled with neurobabble and psychobabble. And one of the things we need to know as we look at these manuals is that the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance is 3 to 5 times more important than any specific treatment that you will use. That in fact, therapists, there are 50% of therapists, there are therapists who get 50% better results and have 50% fewer dropouts than other therapists. And it's the person, the who applies the application that we're going to describe rather than the what of the specific technique. In fact, therapists are not very good in identifying on a routine basis which patients are progressing and moreover, who are candidates for dropping out of therapy. That indeed the effect size of how good we are as therapists has not changed over the 30 years. So as I take you through these next manuals, it is not that I am going to propose that this is the only or best way. In fact, in the area of treatment of suicide, there are several programs that have been found to reduce suicidality by 50%, as we will see. But in terms of the who, it is not the discipline or even the experience or the certification of the therapist or their theoretical orientation that's most important. It boils down to how people implement this manual. Okay? It's the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance. Now, what becomes interesting is that therapists are not very good, as I note in these controversies, on identifying who is at most risk. So therefore, one of the advances in the field is what is called feedback-informed treatment. So I want to, before I take you through the manual, let me just comment on some of the work by Scott Miller, Barry Duncan, Darrell Chow, and others in how to get better results. So Elise, if you kindly go to the fifth slide. Next. So one of the things that becomes interesting is that in that hype article, we included a reference to an article that Norwegian psychologists have put together. And what they entitled their article is Love Yourself as a Person, but Doubt Yourself as a Therapist. And in fact, they developed a set of questions that ascertained the degree to which therapists were, in some sense, humble about how effective they are. In fact, expert therapists never characterize themselves as expert, but constantly solicit feedback from the patient of how well the therapy process is going. So one of the things that we have found useful that I want to comment on is what is called feedback-informed scales. If you're not familiar with it, you should definitely search out Miller's presentation that was offered at the Melissa Institute. So he has developed a simple 2-minute kind of evaluation that he gives out at the beginning of each session called the outcome rating scale. And he asks people to indicate the degree to which on this 10 centimeter line, where they feel in terms of their personal well-being since they began treatment. Moreover, how is their relationships improved with regard to family, close relationships, the degree to which they are now more socially effective in terms of fulfilling roles at work, school, friendships, and overall, how much have they improved? So one of the things we know is that clinicians usually don't get this kind of feedback on a regular basis. We now know that in order to be effective, in order to have that therapeutic alliance, we need improvement as evident to the client within the first 3 sessions. And in fact, improvement at the symptomatic level or achieving their goals will go a long way in establishing the therapeutic alliance. Now, when I keep talking about therapeutic alliance, let's look at the scale that he uses at the end of the session, which is what is called a session by session rating scale. Okay, Lisa, so if you flip to the next one, please. So what you're going to see on the session by session is the degree to which the client and you, the therapist, can ask the client to evaluate how well the relationship is going from the degree to which the client feels understood and respected, the degree to which the goals are relevant in terms of talking about what, in fact, the patient wanted, and the degree to which the client finds that there's a fit. This is actually page 61 of the handout, please. And then overall, was there something missing in the session? So one of the things we now know on that session by session ratings, there you go, thank you, in asking the client at the end to just fill this out, the therapist and the client can indeed ascertain whether in fact there's a fit. And if there's a mismanagement, then the degree to which the therapist and the patient can alter the way in which they're proceeding. This kind of evaluation is not only important with regard to a therapeutic relationship, but this has proven effective in doing bystander interventions as well. That is the degree to which the participants, whether it's the police or people in anger management program, feel that you are attentive and empathic with regard to where they're at and understand it, that you're walking in their shoes, that you're gaining perspective taking. This makes it effective, whether indeed you are trying to have people develop ways to name and tame their anger and not escalate to violence. These kinds of ratings would also be of value to you if you were trying to convince people to wear a mask. There is no behavior change process where these are not critical. And moreover, those who are expert engage in what is called deliberate practice in developing the skills. So in other workshops I've done, as I highlighted, what are the core tasks that expert therapists do? So one last core task, and then we'll be able to move on to the manual, is, Lise, if you could kindly flip on to the next slide, which is of the 9 boxes, okay? And the 9 boxes are included on page 49 to 51 of people's handouts. So if you could slip to 49 to 51, okay, this is your life. So I am always sufficiently audacious in suggesting that I could come up with a game plan that describes any particular situation. So when I was talking about parent stress, I say, look, there's nothing that your kids could do that's not covered by one of those 8 stresses, okay, 1 to 8. Now, maybe I don't know your child, and if in fact you can add to I See Hope, please email me, okay? And I'll give you a referral for where you and your family can be seen. So what I'm going to do now is invite you to join me imaginatively as I go around to different kinds of clinical settings. So I consult at VA hospitals, I consult at head injury centers, I consult at residential programs. And what happens is that when I go to these kinds of programs, what they do is they pick out the most difficult, challenging client, group, family, and then they're going to present me, inundate me at a case conference of all of the relevant information that I should have in my understanding before I go to see that client, group, or family. So I needed some kind of conceptual framework in order to better understand what it is that I'm going to deal with. So I have come up with these 9 boxes, and I would like to take the next few minutes to walk you through these boxes, but I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to suggest by the time I get done with this in about 10 minutes that there is absolutely nothing that you do for a living that I cannot code in these 9 boxes. That this is your life. And in fact, if people ask you what you do for a living, you can actually take out this page and share it with them. So let me walk you through this and highlight for you the therapeutic implications this has for treatment decision making and how we could also assess in terms of a suicidality and the like. So I'll walk you through this rather quickly and tell you how we use it, and then we'll be able, as I share with you specific cases, to have you listen to the videotapes and see how this page stands out. So imagine that this is a screen on your computer and that in fact you can click on any one of these and call up 1A, 1B, and so forth. So 1A means that each of us as clinicians have some kind of intake information that we ascertain from our clients. This may be the age of the client, their marital status, their sexual orientation, their living circumstances, their prior background in terms of treatment, the degree to which they have insurance coverage, or what have you. In fact, one of the things that I often do with clients is to ask them at the outset to share with me how would they describe themselves? How do they see themselves as an individuals? How would other people who know them well describe themselves? So I want to find out if, in fact, the client is going to say, well, I'm a student, I'm a born again Christian, I am a political conservative, I am whatever. So, in fact, that answer to the question in terms of their ethnic or racial identification, their commitment to religious spirituality or political orientation will help me inform how I will be able to use all of this other information. Moreover, I need to ascertain 1B. And what is 1B? How did people get there now? Do they see that they have a problem and they want your assistance in some way to address that problem? Or are they there because they've been mandated? They've been sent there by their boss, their police, their parents. And it turns out that if people don't see they have a problem, if there's not a difference between the way things are and the way they would like them to be, that's a mandate and reminder for me as a therapist to use motivational interviewing in order to address that particular problem. Moreover, I can now move to box 2, and box 2 is what's getting them in now. What's the nature of the presenting problem? Is it their depression and the possibility of suicidality? Is it their substance abuse? Is it the level of anxiety that they're experiencing? Is it the difficulty of their controlling anger? So I need to have a variety of questions that get a functional analysis of when, in fact, these problems exist. How do they manifest themselves? When did they get less? How did they ever stop this? And moreover, I need to also include here the developmental background. And turns out that, especially with regard to anger and violence, this is one of the most stable behaviors over the course of time. And in fact, we could often predict from early childhood to adolescence to adulthood the degree to which anger and violence may be problematic. Indeed, we've even included on the Melissa Institute on our work on domestic violence about how partners can identify the risk potential of their mates. But that's an occasion for another presentation. Moreover, what is the impact of the presenting problem on quality of life? That's 2B. How does it interfere with the relationship? Something's only a disorder, not only if you're distressed by the events, but that this interferes with your day-to-day functioning. So the quality of life assessment becomes important. In fact, we know that some treatments that are designed to remove symptomatology at 2A, for example, the VA studies on various PTSD and the like, may in fact reduce positive symptoms like flashbacks, irritability, sleep disturbance. but they do not spontaneously improve to be. The quality of life, the anhedonia, the ability to achieve meaningful goals. What am I doing? Let me remind you. I'm inviting you to sit next to me as we're being inundated on a lot of information that we're going to be asked to address in the clients, groups, families we're about to see. I'm now providing you with a conceptual framework of what's going on here. Not only that, in about 70% of the cases, we're going to have co-occurring disorders. We're going to have individuals who have either substance abuse or developmental or borderline personality or physical pains, and this is also going to interfere with them. And moreover, these kinds of initial problems of boxes 2 and 3 may be exacerbated by box 4. That is, what are the nature of the stresses that people are experiencing, both current and past. This 4A are the nature of the daily hassles that people have in their lives. These may be physical, economic, may be social, and may be medical, or they may live in a high-risk area. I've worked with native populations for whom there's high risk, as I'll have an opportunity to share with you. There may be high discrimination, poverty, and the like, which is 4B, that exacerbate. And moreover, there may be 4D, that is, your client may have had some exposure to prior victimization, especially adverse childhood experiences that can in fact alter the nature of the brain's development and their ability to develop attachments, or they may come from a family where this particular vulnerability, whether it being the children of offspring of substance abusing alcoholics or depressed moms or what have you, there may be intergenerational transmission of violence. And then finally, we can ask the client, what treatments have you received for all of these things? What are the treatments that you receive, and what work, what hasn't? What you have difficulty following through with? And of all those treatments that you received, what were you satisfied with? So in fact, what I've covered so far, boxes 1 to 5, are what clinicians usually attend to. So we're asking people about their background that will indicate the degree of what are risk and protective factors we need to attend to and how we need to tailor the intervention. We're going to ask them, what is it that led them to get to therapy now, and what's bothering them most? When is it worse? When does it tend to improve? How long has this been going on? What's its impact on a day-to-day basis? And in addition, and if you see me in therapy and you hear me say, in addition, you now know I'm working box 3. So in addition, what are the other kinds of psychiatric and social problems that they have? And moreover, how is this made worse by and exacerbated by? How does the anger get to the point of violence? What drives it, both the present and the past? What's past anger that comes in play that escalates this to the point of violence? And of these, what kinds of treatments have you received? What's worked? What hasn't? What have you had difficulty following through with? What we're particularly satisfied with that we can build on? But my job as a clinician would not be sufficiently done if I didn't go to box 6. And what's box 6? It's what Paul Harvey, the radio commentator, called the rest of the story. These are the sense of strength, the islands of competence. This is the evidence of resilience that people evidence. Either these may be individual or social in terms of support systems, what may be that which I as an organization, I as a therapist can help you access. No one leaves my office without box 6. I have a product that helps me share with the client, and that product is hope. And it has to be realistic hope. It has to be hope that drives the resilience that puts people in the 75% group as compared to the 25% group. It's the hope that will help people get through the pandemic and call upon either individual or social resources that they can call upon. Having covered this with the client, I can now say to the client, where do we begin the process of these different areas? And now what I'm going to do is negotiate with the client what the treatment would be looking like as I summarize the risk and protective factors. And how would we know if we're making progress? When I talk to clients, I say, let me explain what I do for a living. It's not all that complicated. So I work with folks like yourself and try to find out how things are in your life right now. And how would you like them to be? What could we do, Therapeutic Alliance, to help you get there? What have you tried? What's worked in the past? What hasn't? What'd you have difficulty following through with? And if we work together, and I hope we can, how would we know if we're making progress? What will we see changed? What would other people notice? And if I may, can I ask you one last question? Can you, the patient, foresee, can you envision anything that might get in the way? Can you, the policeman who's going through the bystander intervention program, envision or foresee obstacles that might get in the way? Do you have some kinds of doubts that this would work, that would be accepted, that you're putting more people at risk? Are there particular barriers or obstacles in terms of how you feel your colleagues would respond to you doing SNAP and saying amygdala or flashbook? Do you think there are systemic kinds of barriers in terms of how the organization, the people on top would respond to this? If we flip to the next slide, please. You have the next one with regard to the social discourse. Yep. So everything that I just said, okay, to you is not something that's in our head as we're listening to the conference, but this is in fact what you can now say to the client and to significant others. What brings you here is, and you felt it's particularly bad when, and now as you go through this, note that almost every single question I ask is a what and how question. So at your leisure, I invite you to look at the social discourse and try it on. Now, Elise, if you go back to the previous slide, we'll wrap this all up. Okay, so I consult, for instance, at a treatment center for people who have addictions and co-occurring psychiatric disorders in Ontario, Canada, called Homewood. And they have treatment centers all across the country. In Victoria, Vancouver, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Mississauga, Ontario, Montreal, and the like. And I went around to these various settings, actually consulting. And I taught them this case conceptualization, because this is an interesting way. The next time you go to a case conference, in fact, pull this page out. So we were really interested in, when you, the therapist, go into your office and close the door, can you use these boxes to describe how you spent your time, okay? And can we figure out in the collection of data, because each of these boxes represent both risk and protective factors, how you spent your time. So imagine that you go to a colleague after this, and the colleague says to you, you went to Meichenbaum's presentation. So if you got anything out of that, and you're such a hotshot, okay? We've saved a Butte patient for you. I got a referral that you'll love, okay? You will not believe this woman. She is off the wall, okay? Not only that, once you meet her husband, you'll understand why she is potentially suicidal. Not only that, I'm not even sure she's going to show up for every kind of session, okay? Knowing the history of what, and you go, excuse me, in describing this client, you seem to be jumping from box to box. You say she's a real beaut in terms of her presenting problem. And moreover, you're starting off with 2A. And then you say, wait until I meet the husband, and you're immediately going down to 4A. So she's a 2A, 4A person. And then you said she may not even come into the therapy. So this was a 2A, 4A, 5B presentation. And moreover, You then move up to box 9. You know, I'm going back to listen to Meichenbaum again. There is nothing that you do that you cannot code. I would propose that this is your life. The next time you go into a session, play the game. See if you can summarize how you spent your time. Let's make this come alive. Let's move on to the treatment of suicidal patients. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to share with you a variety of clinical cases. Now, I've put together a 90-page manual on treatment that summarizes the facts about suicide, assessment procedures, various ways to document, and the like. So let me tell you about my preoccupation with this particular topic and what I've put together for you. It turns out that I, as a graduate student at the University of Illinois, had a clinical internship at the VA hospital in Danville, Illinois. And the very first patient I ever was assigned and worked with died over the Christmas holiday by taking his life. So as you can imagine, I felt remarkably impacted by this. And even though my supervisor and fellow students said this comes with the territory and this was not your problem. And moreover, I have had over the course of my career 3 additional clients who have experienced suicide. I consulted at one setting where an adolescent came in on a Friday into this residential program. And when his parents came back on Monday morning to visit him, he had died by suicide over the course of the weekend. And I was asked by the staff there to address this. It turns out that when a patient dies by suicide, in 25% of the cases in the United States, those parents or family members will sue the therapist as well as the setting. So I put together a report, and in fact, that report is online. There's an article called 35 Years of Working with Suicidal Patients, whereby we were able to look at what are the kinds of protective factors that this organization should have done. And did they document over the course of the weekend what it is that they did. In fact, you will be able to go on the Melissa Institute website and see an extensive handout on the treatment of depressed and suicidal youth. You can also go to the work by my former student, Joan Asarno, and access her Melissa Institute report on all the ways in which she's trained emergency doctors to intervene with depressed and suicidal individuals. It turns out that the story I have to tell is not unique to me, that death of a suicidal patient was not unique to me. And in fact, in about 30% of the cases for psychologists and social workers and family therapists, they will have a patient over the course of their career that dies by suicide. For psychiatrists, it's 1 in 2. 50% of psychiatrists will have a patient who dies by suicide. That many people who engage in suicidal ideation and behavior are prone to do this while in treatment and soon after being discharged. So the challenge of dealing with suicidal patients and the aftermath, I cover in this detailed handout. And obviously, since I'm going to take 6 hours to walk people through this tomorrow, I'm going to highlight just a few aspects of this in this presentation. A woman comes to see me. She is what every therapist wants to walk into his or her office. She is what is called a walking Yabis. She's young, attractive, verbal, intelligent, and successful. If you, the clinician, could delimit your practices to Yavises, you would have a rich and rewarding life, because Yavises are going to get better with or without you. So you should take credit for it, okay? But this young woman, whose case I've written up in a book called The Evolution of Cognitive Behavior Therapy, has quite a story to tell. And it's a tragedy. And the key question for us, given that I just presented the case conceptualization model, is she's going to tell us about boxes 1 to 5. But it's my job, it's your job as a therapist, to make sure you cover box 6. I've worked with cognitive behavior therapy for over 35 years. And I've often asked myself, what is it about cognitive behavior therapy that makes it effective? And my tongue-in-cheek answer, maybe it's not all tongue-in-cheek, is I think that cognitive behavior therapy works especially because it helps to prevent depression in therapists. So if you're getting depressed on the job, okay, it is because you have embraced the long theoretical perspective. Your psychodynamic, your behavioral, your solution focused, your family oriented. Cognitive behavior therapists do not get depressed because they realize that the story they're getting from boxes 1 to 5 is only part of the story. And it is my job with the client to try and help them turn their tragedy, whatever it is, whatever the stress, into a meaning-making activity. Let's call this client Vicky's mother. Vicky's mother lives with her only daughter and her husband in a guarded, well-protected community. And the husband travels a fair bit. On this one evening, her husband was out of town, and the mother, Vicky's mother, was awoken by a noise emanating from down below. And as she attended more and more, it became apparent that somehow, some way, someone was in their house. How could that be? I mean, she lives in a safe, well, given her maternal instincts, she immediately awakens and goes into Vicky's bedroom. And she and Vicky are going to hide in a deep closet in Vicky's bedroom. And fortunately, the intruder or intruders do not make their way upstairs. So Vicky and her mother come out relatively unscathed, but shaken, as you can well imagine, with this home invasion. Moreover, they then take all the proper precautions of notifying the police, of changing the locks, of telling the husband, of getting an ADT system and the like. And moreover, the husband, who travels a fair amount, convinces Vicky's mother to get a gun. She doesn't like guns, she doesn't want to have guns, but he insists and notes how many other mothers in the neighborhood now have guns. So with some reluctance and even argumentation, she finally gives in and gets the gun. And she puts the gun in the night table next to the bed, as she promised the husband she would do, should there ever be another home invasion. Now, the husband once again is out of town, and the mother is sleeping several weeks past this prior incident. And all of a sudden, she hears a noise emanating from downstairs. No, maybe it's a storm, maybe it's a shutter, maybe she's having a dream of what transpired in the past and reenacting. But as she attends more and more, it becomes apparent that somehow someone is in the house again. How could that be? So once again, given her maternal instinct, she's going to protect Vicky, but something very different and tragic occurs. Because as she's about to go into Vicky's room, she takes the gun in hand. And as she's about to exit her bedroom, Vicky was awoken by the same noise and comes running into her room. And of all the tragedies that occur, the door hits the mother's hand, the gun goes off, and she blows out the brains of Vicky. And this woman is going to sit there in a catatonic state, holding this body in all of its parts until the husband arrives the next day. This woman, who's a teacher at the school of where Vicky attended, does not feel that life is worth living. I mean, if something terrible happens to your child, apropos what happens to Melissa, but if you think that you had inadvertently and could have avoided it, so there she sits before me. And she's telling me about all boxes 1 to 5 in terms of the depression, the humiliation, the shame, the constant reminders, the absence of social supports, the loss of the dream, and in fact, the separation from her husband. So how, if you're in my shoes, can you find box 6? What would you do? So first of all, you give this client permission to tell the story in their own words and at their own pace. You put them in charge. Your humanity reaches out, your sense of a therapeutic alliance that words are inadequate to describe. My eyes tear up as I get this account. And I can then ask her to tell me about Vicky. What, if anything, was special about Vicky and their relationship? And one of the things this woman shares with me is that what impressed her most with Vicky is that she was wise beyond her years. In fact, I'm going to have a field day with that particular phrase. She was wise beyond her years, because I convey to her that I have mothers sitting in that chair who don't even like their daughters. So I want to know what's special about Vicky. And moreover, I'm say to her, I'm going to ask you to do something, and you should feel free to say no, because this is likely to be very painful. But I would appreciate the opportunity if between now and next time, and next time is only going to be 2 days away. In fact, we're going to put a safety plan in place to make sure that gun is not in the house with her. Between now and next time, would she consider bringing in a picture album, a cell phone collection of pictures of what was special about Vicky? And in a subsequent session, she brings in and tells me the nature of the loss of Vicky. And I say to her, if Vicky, who is wise beyond her years, we're here now, if she could curl up into those loving arms and look into those woefully sad eyes, what advice, if any, would Vicky have? What made that relationship so special? And if indeed she decides to kill herself, what happens to the memory of Vicky? So how can I get into box 6? Okay, how do you find strength? So what I do is I call up the absent other and see if I can use that absent other as someone who can help identify the nature of the strengths and resilience that Vicky's mother has. Moreover, one of the things is not only to have them tell the story and retell the story of identifying a purpose for living, a meaning. One of the things is that Vicky's mother goes on to undertake a meaning-making task of making a gift of her experience. She's now able to share with other parents the dangers of keeping guns in the house. She becomes an advocate for gun locks. She collects the data on a regular basis. What is the point of the Melissa Institute? What is the point of the Museum for the Holocaust? What is the point in May of lighting the 6 candles for the Jews who have died in the Holocaust? What is the point of having a story? One of the things Bruin and others highlight is that there is no cure for PTSD. You never get rid of the pain of what Vicky's mother experienced. What we do in these manuals, whether it's the grief or the suicide, is we call up autobiographical memories. Remember that PTSD is essentially a disorder of non-recovery. That while most people are impacted, 75% will go on and evidence resilience and find meaning. Consider the mother of a child that Adam Lanza killed in Newtown, who decides to cremate the son and puts the ashes in a vase next to her bed. And each morning has a discussion with the memory of her son, for whom it was very special. Think of the mother who lost her son and 9/11, the fireman, whose body was never recovered, but who discovered that prior to 9/11, he had donated a vial of blood. And the parents who decide to have a procession to bury the vial of blood. Or the mother whose son was also a fireman who died, but whose body was never found, but who on occasion thinks life's not worth living until she hears that they've discovered body parts of the son. And that, in fact, given DNA testing, they send the body parts to her and she's going to bury it. In fact, I have given a 5-day workshop on trauma, spirituality, and recovery on how to integrate spirituality into the therapeutic process. It is our job to help find the rest of the story. For the American Psychological Association, I was asked to do some interviews. Let's meet Missy. And as you listen to the story of Missy, think about the story she's telling in terms of the history of her victimizations and the like, and how we could then find box 6. Okay. Missy, thank you for coming in. I really appreciate your being here.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I wonder if we can begin by having you tell me a bit about what brings you to our meeting.
I've just been through a lot of things in my life. Well, to start off, at a young age, I was 8, and I saw my grandma get murdered and shot and murdered by my grandfather, and then he killed himself.
At that time?
Yeah. When I was in the house, my mom was in the house, and my grandma was leaving him, and he was acting weird, and he slept on the floor that night, and we had the door locked with all of us in the room. And then that morning, I just heard screaming, and I ran out there, and he was trying to shoot my mom, and then he finally shot my grandma and shot himself, and...
And you witnessed all this?
Yeah. It pretty much screwed up the rest of my life at that point, because a year later, my brother died, and he was 25, but he was like my protector, you know what I mean? And so, when he was gone, everybody's heart was broken, you know what I mean? Because everybody loved him. And so after grandma and then him, I mean, I was just kind of lost for a while, you know.
And how did he die?
He got hit by a train. He was, they always had a designated driver. And one night they wouldn't give him a ride home, so he walked on the railroad tracks. And I don't know if he fell asleep or what happened exactly, but, you know, he got hit by the train and they had to pull the plug, and he left his little 5-year-old son behind. And, you know, I was about to get married and all this other stuff. It was just horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So
You had those 3 events all occur within 2 years.
yeah. And then after that, my mom she was never completely mentally stable or anything, but after that, I mean, she just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it got to a point where, you know, she was a problematic drinker, but not a heavy drinker, you know, just problematic. And then, she got really ill, and she started seeing things, talking to people. I'd have to carry her to the bathtub, carry her out. I mean, she was like 90 pounds, you know, and keep her from drowning in the bathtub. And then she'd always ask me, you know, try to get me to commit suicide with her. And, I mean, so, you know, obviously by age 12, I was already suicidal, you know, because my mom kind of taught me that that's the way to be. So, you know, I did try to commit suicide about 7 times.
You tried to commit suicide 7 times?
Yeah, the first time I slit my wrist. Second time I slit my wrist. No, wait. The first time I did slit my wrist. Second time and third time I took pills. The rest of the time, and then 3 other times I went ahead and I did my wrists and my arms again, because I went in the hospital and they said, oh, you don't do it like that. You do it like that. So I said, oh, okay. Well, thanks a lot, you know. And then and the last time was 5 years ago, and took over 200 pills, Tylox, morphine patches, Serotonin, Thorazine, just anything I could grab. And I had known an experience that you take too many, you get sick. So I took some just to get me enough where I could knock myself out. And then, but where I know that I would be able to finish taking all the pills. And then my stepdad found me, and my heart stopped 3 times. And he said if it wasn't for my age, because I was 20 at the time, that I wouldn't have. Must have been 21. I wouldn't have survived it. They had to fly me to a different hospital and everything. So
that's quite a story.
Yeah.
That's quite a story. Now, with your mom, you said her health was really deteriorating.
Yeah.
Did she actually commit suicide?
Yeah. Yeah, I know that the thing with that is, right, I was already out of the house by then. I got out when I was 17. And she was getting evicted because my stepdad told her that she could only stay there and as long as I had a roof over my head, and she was living there with her boyfriend. Now, it was supposed to be a suicide pact where my mom and her boyfriend, Mark, were supposed to kill themselves together. She was going to take her pills. He was going to get drunk and stab himself in the heart. Well, he fed her the pills. She died, and he didn't. He passed out and then woke up and called his sister, who climbed through the window to find her dead. And they called my husband and told him to wake me up and not tell me what happened. And all he did was wake me up, and he said, there's an emergency. And I said, is she dead? Do you know what I mean? I was expecting it. But, it was still hard, I have some resentment toward her, but I've kind of tried to let a lot of that go, because it was almost a relief to me that I didn't have to worry so much. And, she wanted to move in with me, and this, it was just a relief. I know that sounds horrible, like I'm a horrible daughter or something, but just to have to be the parent for so long, and I don't know.
Now, as you track the suicide attempts, you said that the last one hasn't occurred for 5 years. Tell me what's been going on in that 5 years that had led you not to.
Oh God, it's been a constant battle. I mean, I have suicidal tendencies like you wouldn't believe. I mean, there's almost, every day, oh, what if I hit that tree or something, you know what I mean? But I'm not suicidal, you know what I mean? I think about it, I could plan it, but I have my baby sister now. I have, I've got a little family left. I've got my stepdad who took care of me and saved my life, basically. And, and actually what's so sad is my stepdad raped me when I was 16. And I've told people, and they think I'm lying because I still talk to him. But the thing is, I mean, that's all I got left, you know what I mean, is my stepfather. And, he treats me well, He doesn't do anything like that anymore. I was drunk and I blacked out, and I guess he just took advantage of the situation. But, but that's my dad, But I think what's kind of helped me is my baby sister, because she's 12.
So this is your, tell me.
Half-sister.
This is your half-sister.
Yeah, but my dad's daughter.
Okay. And where does she live?
Grant Park.
So does she, okay, you can take it off, Elise. Let me just. So the reason I showed you that tape is, and I had another, but we're not going to have time to review it, given that we're ending it in a little bit, and I want to also leave time for questions, is because this actual interview goes on for another 45 minutes. And at the point when she mentions that she has a sister, she smiles, and I clinically pounce, or you may prefer strategically intervene, because joining in others indicates that some of the best predictors of suicide is the degree to people feel that they're a burden on others, or they feel that they have thwarted belongingness, that they're marginalized, that no one understands, no one cares. So in fact, this interview continues on, and we try to find out her goals in the situation. One of the fascinating things about Missa is that she's also, when I ask her about how she spends her time, describes that she is an escort and that she was arrested in Chicago, and she moved away from Chicago and broke away from the pimps, and that she's really quite entrepreneurial. So one of the things that becomes very interesting is that I'm able to take her life experiences, looking both at the risk and protective factors of what she's engaging in. So even though with each repeated episode, lethality increases, and in terms of the boxes, one of the things that becomes really interesting is that there are a number of high-risk elements to her background in terms of the variety of victimizations that she's experienced, whether it's the rape by the stepfather, being the offspring of a depressed suicidal mother, the degree to which she has multiple attempts. And in some sense, we're able to look at her relationship with a husband. And apropos of what I did with Vicky's mom, we're able to do that with regard to this client. In fact, when you get to the prolonged and complicated grief and also the suicidal things, you'll see that many of the new interventions that deal with the variety of emotions that people have, whether it's the guilt or shame, the anger, and the like, are all designed to use an absent other. They often use a Gestalt entry chair to bring in the memory of others and to translate people's lives into something that's worthwhile. Now, I had a choice between trying to show you the movies and going through the case conceptualization, or reading what you could read for yourself in these two manuals. In fact, what you will find in the manuals on the treatment of suicidal patients is not only the facts about the suicide, but also assessment devices. In fact, it would have been, I always wondered, interesting if we had an opportunity to know what was the assessment by whoever the psychologist was, a psychiatrist, who interviewed Jeffrey Epstein, the child abuser, who then went on the next day to die by suicide, had hanged himself. There's a way in which I review on page 53 the various techniques that work. The work by Jobs. In fact, you should go to his article on how to assess suicide using telehealth in that fashion. That's online. And then it walks you through various ways to do safety nets, how to use the empty chair, Gestalt procedures, cognitive restructuring, and the like. So I invite you, and if you have questions about that, you can feel free to email me. What have I done? I've, in this second session, tried to get you to be a critical consumer, to love yourself as a person, but to doubt yourself as a therapist, to constantly solicit feedback from the client about the fit, because whether you're doing bystander interventions or therapy, the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance is critical. And most therapists don't systematically assess for it, nor routinely monitor that in some way. I challenge you to take your next session and write a progress note indicating of exactly how you spent your time using the 9 boxes. And in fact, find someone else who is also attending this and see if they are also able to do this. I want you to have some appreciation of the degree to which the Melissa Institute can be a resource for your future work. So having said that, let me turn it over to Elise to see if any particular questions have been forthcoming. You can submit questions to me later on if we don't have enough time to cover it right now. So Elise, do you have anything on the platter for me to address in the remaining few minutes?
Yeah. Yes, we have several, and maybe we can also, for those who didn't ask it in the chat box, we can also open up to if you wanted to unmute and ask. But I'll ask this one that we got a while ago. Someone had said, "I noticed you often use construction. It makes me feel. I try never use this construction and sometimes discuss it with the client when they do. This is based on choice therapy. Thoughts?"
I'm sorry, I'm missing the thrust of this. I feel, or is that the patient saying that?
Yeah, that it makes me feel that this person is saying they try not to use this construction and they discuss it with the client when they do. And it's based on choice therapy. They're just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, my goal is to what I would describe as go public with the data. That is, if a client is presenting me with something, I would say, I noticed something in what you described in terms of the situations you're in, the kinds of thoughts you had, the kinds of feelings. So the first thing I want to do is go public and put back in their lap that which I observe that's guiding my influence as a therapist. The second kind of notion here would be to then take whatever they've described and use it within the clock. So the phrase per se of I or you, it's really using the language that the client has that becomes really the operative in this situation. I'm not sure if I'm getting close to the concern, but that would be the way.
Yeah, Dr. Meichenbaum?
Yeah.
Hi, I wrote that comment, and part of my therapy is to try to get people to see they have choices about
Right.
their feelings, which is another approach from the vicious cycle. But I'm just curious because both in my personal life and in my therapy, I never find a reason why I should say it made me feel as opposed to I felt. I felt with the options, and it made me feel makes me a victim.
No, I totally concur with you. I want them to see that they have choices. So the vicious cycle kind of metaphor that I use is one in which I want them to take on more responsibility. Even my question, do you ever find yourself out there in a day-to-day experience asking yourself the questions, is attempt to share that responsibility. keep in mind that all of these nuances that we talk about in terms of the therapy, whether it's a specific language and so forth, it's less important. These particular techniques isn't what makes therapy work, okay? It's the degree to which the patient feels that the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance fits. That's 5 times more important than any of these specific techniques, okay? So it's the degree to which they could take on some responsibility and take ownership of taking their voice with them. In the same way that my mother wanted me to take her voice with me, that obviously has persisted over my 80 years. I'm not sure if I'm getting close to your concern, but I encourage you to sort of try the session by session outcome and see where that fits in. The response and how you discuss that with the client is going to be more important than any one of these aspects. And my clock is essentially designed to help that. In fact, here's another major therapist that I would have you consider, okay? I just did a review of a book on single session therapy. And one of the ways to bolster people through the pandemic is to use humor. So let me, before I share that, let me make one additional request of all those who attend. First of all, would you kindly share and try the slide program on yourself and others and give us feedback? Secondly, as Elise mentioned right at the outset, the Melissa Institute, who's made this for free, and I've done so as well, have made a plea for you to make a donation. And since your Christmas time is likely to be more electronic and virtual than direct, here's a suggestion. So perhaps you can make a donation to the Melissa Institute in the honor of one of your family members, friends, or coworkers. And if you make a donation to your friends as a Christmas present, the Melissa Institute will in turn, if you share their email address, name, and address with the Melissa Institute, we will be more than happy to send out an email acknowledging for them your contribution. We won't mention the amount. So hopefully the 23 years that the Melissa Institute has tried to prevent violence, that you will help us to continue on for another 23 years. Here's my favorite therapist for you to take away, who does single session therapy.
Dr. Switzer?
Yes, come in. I'm just washing my hands.
I'm Catherine Bigman. Janet Carlisle referred me.
Oh, yes. Still being buried alive in a box.
Yes, that's me. Did I lay down?
Oh, no, we don't do that anymore. Just have a seat. And let me tell you a bit about our billing. I charge $5 for the first 5 minutes. And then absolutely nothing after that. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Too good to be true, as a matter of fact.
Well, I can almost guarantee you that our session won't last the full 5 minutes. Now, we don't do any insurance billing, so you would either have to pay in cash or by check.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't make change.
All right.
And go.
Go.
Well, tell
What?
me about the problem that you wish to address.
Oh, okay. Well, I have this fear of being buried alive in a box. I start thinking about being buried alive and I begin to panic.
Has anyone ever tried to bury you alive in a box?
No, but truly thinking about it does make my life horrible. I mean, I can't go through tunnels or be in an elevator or in a house, anything boxy.
So what you're saying is you're claustrophobic.
Yes, that's it.
All right, well, let's go, Catherine. I'm going to say 2 words to you right now. I want you to listen to them very, very carefully. Then I want you to take them out of the office with you and incorporate them into your life.
Well, shall I write them down?
Well, if it makes you comfortable, it's just 2 words. We find most people can remember them.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay, here they are. Stop it!
I'm sorry?
Stop it!
Stop it?
Yes, STOP, new word, IT.
So what are you saying?
You know, it's funny. I say 2 simple words, and I cannot tell you the amount of people who say exactly the same thing you're saying. I mean, this is not Yiddish, Catherine. This is English. Stop it.
So I should just stop it.
There you go. I mean, you don't want to go through life being scared of being buried alive in a box, do you? I mean, that sounds frightening.
It is.
Then stop it.
I can't. I mean, it's been with me since childhood.
No, we don't go there. Just stop.
So I should just stop being afraid of being buried alive in a box.
You got it. Good go. Well, it's only been 3 minutes, so that will be $3.
Actually, I only have a 5, so.
Well, I don't make change.
Then I guess I'll take the full 5 minutes.
Fine. All right. Well, what other problems would you like to address?
I'm bulimic. I stick my fingers down my throat.
Stop it! What are you, nut of some kind? Don't do that.
But I'm compelled to. My mom used to call me fatty.
No, we don't go there.
But I've been having this dream.
No, we don't go there either.
But my horoscope did say.
We definitely don't go there. Just stop it. What else?
Well, I have self-destructive relationships with men.
Stop it! You want to be with a man, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, then stop it. Don't be such a big baby.
I wash my hands a lot.
That's all right. I wash my hands all the time. There's a lot of germs. Yeah, don't worry about that.
I'm afraid to drive.
Well, stop it! How are you going to get around? Get in the car and drive, you kook.
Stop it! Stop it! You stop it!
What's the problem, Catherine?
I don't like this. I don't like this therapy at all. You're just telling me to stop it.
And you don't like that.
No, I don't.
So you think we're moving too fast? Is that it?
Yes. Yes, I do.
All right, then let me give you 10 words that I think will clear everything up for you. You want to get a pad and a pencil for this one?
Right.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here are the 10 words.
Stop it or I'll bury you alive in a box.
Okay. So that's Bob Newhart doing one of his routines, right? And obviously the 2 manuals I've put together is to try and have you appreciate especially the seriousness of the pandemic and its potential in engendering stress that leads to an increase of some 800% of people who are considering suicide by calling hotlines, or the other work we've done with vets who are described in the handout, and most importantly, how to help people with grief. We now know that having people engage in box 6 resilience engendering behavior of having gratitude and forgiveness, of having compassion, of having social supports, of engaging in mindfulness, engaging in safety plans, of enjoying the humor, of finding meaning-making activities, that while victimization can impact the brain, so can resilience-engendering behavior, like humor. I hope that this presentation and all the work we've done in creating anger management and bystander intervention is of use to you and your clients. Please be safe and please share what we've offered. And finally, consider supporting the Melissa Institute. Thank you for your attention and interest. All the best, Don Meichenbaum.
Thank you, Don, especially for your dedication to the Institute and for the extraordinary work that you always inspire us to do.